Are the names Shemua, Shaphat, Igal, Palti, Gadil, Gadi, Amil, Sether, Nabhi, and Januel familiar to you? Probably not. These are all biblical names and are all found in one chapter of the Old Testament. Although these men are not familiar to us, they were all leaders in their tribes and they helped to shape the destiny of the nation of Israel. So why do we not know who these men are? Maybe if I added two more names to this list, it might clear up the mystery. What if I added the names Joshua and Caleb? Now we recognize who these men were. These were the 12 spies who were sent to spy out the land of Canaan. The first 10 names that I mentioned, however, were the ones who had no faith. Why is it that we only remember Joshua and Caleb? In Numbers 13, we find the answer to this question. Here is recorded one of the most significant moments in the history of Israel. Moses had led the people from Mount Sinai to the border of the land of Canaan. 12 men were issued orders to go on a reconnaissance mission to spy out the land of Canaan. When they returned from this 40-day mission, the nation gathered around to hear their report. And can you imagine the reaction that they must have received? A report of a land that flowed with milk and honey. But then they received the bad news. The inhabitants lived in large fortified cities, and the land was occupied by at least 4 different groups of people. And finally, it was reported about the giants. So what do you think the people did? They protested out of fear and anxiety. These 10 faithless spies had gone on this expedition looking for reasons why they should not try to take the land of Canaan. And of course, they found what they were seeking. They presented their report very skillfully, pretending to be very factual and objective in their report, but the facts they presented were designed for one purpose, and that was to discourage the people from moving as God had commanded. Then Caleb comes on the scene, and notice what he has to say to the crowd in Numbers 13 and verse 30. Let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome. Here we see a courageous man who is trying to pass on some of this courage. God had commanded them to go forward, and that was what Caleb was convicted to do. But Caleb is contradicted by the 10 faithless spies who insist that success is impossible. Therefore, the words of 10 men against 1 was destructive to the faith of the people. As we move into chapter 14, we see the beginning of rebellion among the Israelites. Moses, Aaron, Joshua, and Caleb, they tried to bring the people of God back to a position of faithfulness, but they could not be persuaded. So what happened? An entire generation of people, due to their unfaithfulness, were sentenced to die in the wilderness. Of the 12 spies, only Joshua and Caleb were permitted to survive the 40 years of wilderness wandering and enter into the promised land. This is why we remember these 2 names and have forgotten the others. But what set Joshua and Caleb apart from the others? Notice Numbers 14 and verse 24. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land in which he went, and his descendants shall possess it. It is this spirit that determines whether our faith will be remembered or forgotten. A remembered faith is one that knows and depends upon the promises of God. Caleb remembered God's deliverance from Egypt. He remembered the 10 plagues, the crossing of the Red Sea, the message of God from Mount Sinai. The only condition that God placed was that they had to remain faithful to Him. Caleb focused on this. Caleb said in Numbers 14 and verse 8, if the Lord delights in us, He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. Pleasing God was all that mattered to Caleb. If our faith is one that is going to be remembered, we too must have this same spirit today. And the bottom line is this controversy rested on one issue. Would God's people do what God had commanded? God described Caleb as having followed Him fully. Each step Caleb made was made with the confidence that God would fulfill His promises. Caleb was willing to take that step of entering the promised land with the same faith that he held when he stepped out of Egypt. A remembered faith is not a halting faith. It is not uncertain. It is not an on and off thing. It is willing, confident, and fearless in doing God's will. will we be remembered for our faith. Thank you for listening today. May God bless you with a great day.